Are you wanting to make rose cuttings? Hi, Jeff the Rose Dude here, and in this video, we'll be going over how to make your own rose cuttings. Now, there's a good chance that you have already seen a lot of other videos and articles on how to make rose cuttings, and it seems like everybody is doing something a little bit different. And as much as I encourage you to look up different methods and see what would work for you and what looks like it would be fun for you, it can sometimes also be confusing because at the end of it, you've seen a million different techniques and methods and materials used, and you don't even really know what to do at that point. It's really confusing. So in this video, I am going to be showing you how to do rose cuttings step by step. I'm also going to be sharing with you what the most popular methods are and materials that people use that they are successful with. Uh, that way, at the end of this, you'll be able to be a lot more confident and comfortable and less confused and scared about making rose cuttings of your own. So let's get started. Now, the first thing that we're going to need is obviously rose material. You can either get it from one of your rose bushes, or a lot of people sometimes will even use roses that you get at flower shops. You also want to find semi-hard wood. You may have heard about hardwood, softwood, semi-hard, but when we're thinking about the traditional cuttings, you're going to be the most successful using semi-hard wood. So what exactly is semi-hard wood? It's basically a stem that has grown this past year, but hasn't just grown. You can usually tell if the stem is flexible, not too flexible, but if it's still flexible, then it's a semi-hard wood. The best way to tell is when you're actually deadheading your roses. This is a good one. So it was time for me to deadhead this rose. It's pretty much past its prime, so this is a very good candidate. Now, as you can see, this whole stem grew this year, and it is going to be flexible. It doesn't break though, so this is a good one. The first thing that we want to do is cut the rose off, cut the flower off from the stem. There's a lot of videos out there that unfortunately they show you planting flower buds or the rose hips or even just leaves, and it miraculously grows roots. That's simply not true. You need to have a stem because that's where the cells are that actually grow the roots. There is nothing in a flower that is going to grow roots. And a very good rule of thumb too, knowing what is hardwood, is that most roses, the thickness of the cane is going to be about the thickness of a pencil. So that's a really good starting point with taking rose cuttings. Obviously, there's a lot of different varieties out there. If you're taking cuttings from miniature roses, you're not going to find canes that are semi-hard and this thickness. Obviously, they're going to be thinner. But yeah, just a general rule of thumb, find most of your roses about a thickness of a pencil and you'll be good to go. Now, above every single leaf is what is called a node. I don't know if you can see that. Yep, you can see that right there. But that is where new growth comes from on a rose. So if you are deadheading or you're pruning, you want to cut above that, and that's where the new stem is going to grow from, and you'll have new flowers coming from there. In this case, with rose cuttings, we're going to cut below the leaf node, and that's where the roots will grow. So generally, when most people take rose cuttings, they want to have anywhere from 1 to 2 nodes that are below your planting medium and anywhere from 1 to 3 nodes above the planting medium, and that's where the new growth is going to come from. And in my case, I do like to have 2 nodes that are below the planting medium, and I like to have about 3 nodes above. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to count 5 sets of leaves and cut just below the bottom leaf. So I have my cutting right here. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaves. I cut at the top, I cut just above the node, and at the bottom, I cut just below the bottom node. And because I want to have 2 nodes that are below the planting surface, I'm going to remove the 2 bottom leaves from the stem. And as you can see, I have one node here and I'll have another node here. So I have two places where roots can grow. And I'm also keeping the leaves on the stem. The leaves, through photosynthesis, is going to be your plant's only way to actually get food for the roots to develop. Now, sometimes there will be too many leaves, so what I'll do is I'll just take my pruners and I will cut some of the leaflets off to make it a little bit smaller, because the more leaves that are on there, it's going to create more food, but this is also a way for the plant to actually lose water. And a cutting, the biggest problem with cuttings is water. Either they get too much or they don't get enough, and you'll not end up getting successful cuttings. So leaving some leaves on so it can make food is great, but I'm also reducing the chance that it loses too much water. Now, the next step that we'll be doing is dipping this in rooting hormone. But what a lot of people do is that they will either remove the thorns from the bottom portion of the stem, and or they will take their pruners and they will kind of scrape some of the skin off from the stem. And what that does is it creates scabs. And when you dip it in rooting hormone, the rooting hormone has more to stick to, or to cling onto the stem, and will give you a much better success rate at growing roots. And there are a lot of roses that do have a lot of thorns. So if there are a lot of thorns, then I won't take my pruners and scrape, because I've made enough scabs for rooting hormone to attach to. Some people don't even take the thorns off. But my theory is that the thorns aren't going to do anything in the soil or the planting medium except for rot. So I might as well just get them off. It gives me more rooting hormone, and a better chance of growing roots. Now on to the topic of rooting hormones. There are a lot of different rooting hormones that people use, from not using any at all to a commercialized made um, product that is for rooting, to other things like honey. And all of them do work. Not using any rooting hormone, roots can grow still. But I have noticed that the success rate isn't going to be as high than using a something for rooting. I've also have seen honey and I have tried it. I have had some success, but I found it to be really messy, and I was not as successful as just a made rooting hormone that's made for cuttings. Now, there is powder, which I like to use, and then there is also a liquid rooting hormone, which works just as well. But I would highly suggest using a rooting hormone. It is really easy to find in stores and it is cheap. So there's no reason really why you wouldn't want to try this at first. It works really well. So just go out and get one. I would highly suggest it. So you're going to want to dip the bottom of your cutting into the rooting hormone. And what you're going to do is you're going to try to get the rooting hormone to cover the leaf node. And see all of the thorns that I took off? It's just that much extra um, hormone that's on there to help promote roots. So the next thing that we're going to be wanting to know is what we want to put our cuttings into. Obviously, some type of container and some type of planting medium. So we'll go over the containers first. And honestly, I have used cells, I have used 4-inch pots, I have used gallon containers, and I have used propagation boxes, and they all work just as good as any of the other ones. The most important thing that you want your container to have is drainage holes. You want to have good drainage. Rootings do best when they're moist, not wet and not dry. So having a good drainage system in your container is going to be your best bet, and you'll want to try to have something with drainage. Now, some people will also put their cutting directly into their garden, and that works for a lot of people. It doesn't necessarily work for me because I live in a very cold climate in the winter, and having a new plant that just rooted, the roots are not old or mature enough to be able to withstand the harsh cold temperatures in the wintertime. So having them in a container, I'm able to keep them a lot more protected by putting the pots in an unheated garage or in the shed or up against the house, somewhere to where they're going to be protected a little bit more than being out in the garden. So planting medium, there are a ton of different planting mediums, and when you start mixing them up, the possibilities are endless. So I'm sure you've seen so many people use so many different things that they're actually putting their cuttings into. And I do like to break it into three categories. The first category I like to call the weird and exotic. Those are going to be the things like potatoes, I've seen bananas, I have seen tomatoes that they just put the cutting into. I personally haven't used them, so I can't say that it doesn't work. But what I can tell you is that most successful people that do cuttings and businesses that's all they do, production of cuttings, are not using these exotic items. The second category is what I call soil. So anything that you consider dirt. So, soil from your garden, potting soil, compost, that's going to be in that category, soil. And those work really well. The one problem that you can have with those is that it can contain harmful fungus and bacteria that can lead your stem to rotting before the roots grow on them. And the last category I call soilless. So anything that you don't think of as dirt. So things like perlite, like sand, peat moss, and shredded bark aren't dirt, and those are materials that you can use. And one of the benefits of using a soilless mix, so unlike your soil mixtures, a lot of the soilless don't have as much of that harmful fungus and bacteria, and it can help prevent rotting of your stem. But honestly, use what you have on hand. Every year I use something different, and I'm successful with a lot of them. So this year I had some extra sand, I had extra bark, and I had perlite that I just mixed up, and I think I had like a handful or two of compost that I put in there, and I'm doing fine. I have no question in my mind that I'm not going to be successful. So use what you have at first, and then you can go from there, but don't be too overly worried about what kind of soil that you're using. And there are some that show not using any planting material at all, where you just put it in a glass of water and the roots will grow out. I would be cautious doing that. Even though it does work, it is too wet, and most of the time your stems will rot before they grow roots. So when I was talking about you want to have drainage, if you're putting in a glass of water, you have no drainage at all, and most of the time your cuttings will not be successful. You can get some, but the success rate isn't really going to be that high. So once you have your container and your planting medium, what you want to do before you put in your cutting is you just want to water it really well. And the reason why you're doing this is that, number one, you're checking the drainage to see how well it does drain, which this is really well. But also because I have this cutting with the rooting hormone on it, if I put the cutting in this container and then I water it, then I'm going to wash all of the rooting hormone off. And then that step was for nothing, really. So, just make sure that you have good drainage and that this is well watered. So once you have your cutting in here, you don't have to water it for a while. Now we're just going to take our cutting and we're going to insert it in here to where all the nodes that we wanted to have underneath the medium is. So the two that I have are down below, and then I have my 1, 2, 3 leaves here, and I have my cutting. Now the next step that we want to do is to have some kind of dome to where it creates a good humid environment. So like I said before, we don't want our stems to dry out before they grow roots. Right now, there is nothing that is really helping keeping the stem hydrated. So by putting a dome of some sort over this, it's going to create a lot of humidity for the leaves, so you're not going to be losing as much water from the leaves. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of domes that you can use. You can use clear plastic cups. I've seen 2-liter bottles with the bottom cut off, like pop bottles, put over there, and those work really well. I've seen people use milk gallon jugs, and they use the bottom for the soil, and they have the top that creates that nice humid environment. If you have a misting system that periodically puts mist onto the leaves, you can do that as well. So there's a lot of different kinds of domes that you can use. So, use what makes sense to you, what you have available. So just as long as you have a good humidity for your leaves, you're going to be good to go. I like to use a container, like a Tupperware container, storage container, and it has a clear lid, and I will put all of my containers in there, and it has that lid, so I just put the lid on and it keeps everything nice and humid inside. It takes usually on average cuttings about 6 to 8 weeks before it starts growing roots, and you can tell by just gently tugging on the stem to see if there's any resistance, and if there is, then you know you have roots. But I would not go out every single day, especially initially putting a rooting, because all you're going to do is you're going to disturb the plant. Any small roots can get damaged. So avoid checking on it for, at least 6 weeks. And then once you do have the roots, then you can go ahead and transplant it. Now, another thing that you want to do during that time is obviously making sure that your cutting has enough water. So you want to make sure that the planting medium is not dried out. So if it does seem to be dry, then you want to give it a little bit of a watering. If you don't see water condensation on your humidity dome or on the leaves, then you can go ahead and take like a misting bottle of water, and you can mist the leaves and or the dome and to help with that humidity level. And you're going to want to have your cuttings in a lit area because you do have leaves and they are making food and energy for roots. They still need to be exposed to some light. The one thing that you want to do is try to keep them out of direct sunlight. Because there is a dome on there, that acts as a magnifying glass, and it will increase the temperature inside at a very high rate, and your cuttings will not be successful if they are cooked. And also because the leaves are going to be wet, you will end up getting leaf burn. So if you are doing them inside, then by a windowsill that is well lit, but the sun isn't directly beating on them. If you have them outside, try to find an area that is shaded, but if you look up, you can see the sky. So they're getting a lot of indirect sunlight, but they're staying away from that direct sunlight that can cause that excess heat and the leaf burning. After that 6 to 8 weeks, once your cutting has grown roots, you're going to want to start decreasing the humidity for the leaves. Because it has roots, it's able to draw up water from the roots, and you don't want all that excess humidity because then it can lead to other problems. But what you want to do is kind of harden off with the humidity levels. So by gently lifting up the cup every day, poking holes at the top of the cup more as each day goes on to slowly decrease that humidity level is going to be your best bet. And once you have that humidity dome off, then you can go ahead and transplant. But depending on the container and the material that you're using, you may not need to transplant. If you've already had it in your garden, then you're good to go. And if you have them in just nothing but perlite, then you will need to transplant them into something that's soil and more sustainable for it to grow. This cutting, once it grows roots, I will probably leave him in here at least for about a year or until the roots start growing out, and then I'll transplant it into a larger container. And that's pretty much making rose cuttings. It is a lot easier than what it may seem to be like. So please do not be afraid of it. There are a lot of different techniques that you can use. There's a lot of materials that you can use. And don't be afraid to try different methods. And there is no such thing as failing. So if you made a lot of cuttings and none of them were successful, you did not fail. You are just one step closer to being successful. And if you didn't have success, then you now know that you can be able to tweak a little bit. One of the biggest problems with cuttings that do not successfully grow roots and being successful is from your watering. So they will either rot or they will dry out before they grow roots. And the easiest way to tell usually is that you'll start seeing them turn black or a dark brown. If that color change starts at the top, that generally means that your cutting was dry. It started drying out. And if it's at the base, starts at the base and starts moving up, then usually that means that it had too much water. So the next time that you attempt making rose cuttings, then you'll know if you need to water a little bit less, mist a little bit less, or if you need to water and mist more. So it's just a learning curve. Do not be afraid of not being um, successful at your very first attempt. We've all started at the very same point, and there are very few of us that have actually been successful at our very first time trying. So, and that's actually the fun of gardening is the experimenting and the learning of it. So there's no such thing as failure. Keep on trying. You will be successful. Once you are successful, stick with what you did. And that's what everybody that has shown videos that show you how they do it, they have probably tried other methods before, but they found the one that works for them, then something that they enjoy doing. So they share that method with you. So once you are successful, keep on doing that because that is going to be the one that works for you. And if you have any questions regarding rose cuttings, please feel free to ask me in the comment section below. I love answering any and all questions that come my way. And if you like this video and want to see more like this, please consider subscribing to my channel as I put out videos concerning rose propagation, growing roses from seed, hybridizing roses, general rose care, and their companion plants. Your support is greatly appreciated. Have fun with your roses.